You're listening to Tony Graham here on Binjang 91.5, and it's time for Tech Talk with Bugger Me. You're listening to Binjang 91.5, and it's time for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson in Studio 2. Good afternoon, Matthew.
Good afternoon, Tony. Thanks for chatting to me again.
It's always great to do that. I always look forward to Tuesdays because Tech Talk for me is something that really interests me. Now, what's the latest technology being used by, of all things, paedophiles as a hunting ground?
Well, it's one of the things that many parents, and in fact many kids, probably don't think is something that puts them at risk. When they're playing games on Xboxes and PlayStations, there is some actual grooming being done by paedophiles as well. And this has been a survey, or not a survey, but some research coming out of the UK. Over 1,000 victims were targeted online in the past 2 years just in the UK, which is pretty scary when you start to extrapolate that across the rest of the world. Now, many of those grooming cases involve popular sites such as Facebook or WhatsApp or Instagram, and that seems pretty obvious. But predators are also lurking on less known sites and players, and they basically pretend to be other players playing online on gaming consoles such as PlayStations and Xboxes. And I know my son alone, who loves his PlayStation, he's played against other people and he has no idea who they are, no idea anything about them. And for all we know, they could be 80-year-old men who are trying to groom someone and get them in a situation that's a bit uncomfortable, to say the least. So effectively, it's basically a bit of a warning, I suppose, just to be on the lookout for parents and people that play the games as well. Again, you're just sitting there playing a game thinking that you're having fun and someone's joining in, and the conversation, and again, this grooming process can take weeks or even months. The conversation slowly gets to where a pedophile wants to get it to. But when you look at some of the individual cases from police forces out of the UK, the Met Police, for example, they had 102 grooming cases in the last 2 years. That's just one of the police forces in the UK. And most of these are going via the internet, some via Xboxes and PlayStations. But you look at some of the other ones. So in Northumbria, for example, there were 97 cases of grooming. 87 of those were online grooming. So it is really a fertile ground for pedophiles, the internet, because they can be so anonymous and work so easily on people and get them to that point where they might finally take advantage of them. So it's a warning for people out there everywhere. They probably were being aware, but when some of the data comes through, it's pretty scary just how many cases we're seeing of this.
Yeah. Now, Matthew, I've seen you sneak around Dubbo there in your Vespa scooter, and I think you should upgrade to an electric one. But, are they too slow, do you think?
Look, I think electric scooters are definitely too slow. They're typically limited to 25 kilometres per hour. But there's a new range of scooters called the e-scooter 6, and 6 is spelled S1X. And they're a carbon fibre version of a Segway scooter, and they can hit speeds of 100 kilometres an hour. Now, 25 I find a bit too slow, but I'm not convinced that I'd like to go 100 k's an hour on a scooter with nothing around me to protect me and 5 or 6 inches off the ground. But it's all part of a new series, a new racing series called the e-scooter Championship, or ESC for short. And it's meant to start towards the end of the year. So these scooters that were specially built for it are pretty impressive little devices, and they'll be racing around specially built circuits. I don't know that I'd like to be going 100 k's an hour down some of our streets, Tony, with the various potholes and bumps and even just the cracks in a bit of concrete or bitumen when you're that close to the ground and not a lot of suspension there. Basically, it's something that you really would want some specialised circuits. The circuits they're going to race on will be about 400 metres long to 1 kilometre long, so that is designed to have some fairly action-packed racing, fairly tight racing. You'll have heats with, basically I think 6 scooters on there. They'll race for 8 to 10 minutes each, and then that'll go through to a final with 10 riders competing for a win. So the idea is a bit like Formula E. You'll have a standard scooter. So Formula E has the standard cars that they race in. Everyone will be given these standard scooters. They'll be limited in what they'll be able to do to those scooters, and then maybe after a couple of years they'll be able to have individual scooters come into it. But the scooters themselves are pretty impressive. They've got two 6 kilowatt motors on them, so one on each wheel. And they've got a 24 amp hour battery, 1.33 kilowatt hour capacity, and again, as I mentioned before, about 100 k's an hour. The scooter weighs 35 kilograms, and you've got hydraulic disc brakes. So it's pretty impressive for pulling up some of these scooters. If you're game enough, Tony, I'm not sure if I'd go quite this far, but the manufacturers say that you can lean over to 50 degrees before you'll lose control or lose traction on them. The good news is that you and I might think about putting a team in, because just like Formula E, they wanted to keep the price down to make it really affordable for people to come in. So they're saying to get started in the first season of the e-scooter series, we'll only need to get together about £400,000 and we can get cracking on it. So I think we should start the fundraising today.
Yeah, in the meantime, Matthew, I think you should stick with the Vespa. You can't have a very dashing figure in a Vespa, around Dubbo there. I know you're in disguise when you do it. Now,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sanctions and bans have hurt Huawei. That's the Chinese manufacturer, by the way. So what is their latest move?
Yeah, it is interesting. Obviously, it really has hurt. The US has got some sanctions and bans on Huawei. The Australian government has followed. So to sell their mobile phones, and they were going quite well with the mobile phone market, it's made it pretty hard because people are concerned, or governments are concerned about the 5G network owned by Huawei. So the next thing they've decided to do, as many other tech giants have started to do, is they've started to look at building cars. And it's interesting because the whole concept of building a car now seems to have changed. Tesla seems to have changed this to a certain extent, where they're really making it a big piece of technology, or a big smartphone, if you like, on some wheels. So essentially they're looking at what they can do. They've basically looked at some of the manufacturing plants that are already in China to see if they can use some of those manufacturing plants to start to manufacture and basically get into the car manufacturing game. The exciting thing for you and I, Tony, is that the more of these tech giants that start moving into the car market, or start to dip their toes into the car market, it means that I think we'll get better cars at the end of all this, with the more competition with traditional car manufacturers and then some of these larger car or tech giants. I think we'll just get better cars. So there's a few other, if you like, car manufacturers over in China that they're maybe going to go into collaboration with. Chang'an Automobile is one. They certainly have got some manufacturing facilities they might use. But you've got, of course, other companies as well. Kia have been in talks with Apple. They've denied that, of course, which means that it definitely will go ahead. Waymo, which is part of Google, is starting to use their autonomous technology in cars. Even Baidu, which is the equivalent of Google in China, looking at a strategic partnership with another car manufacturing company. So it's certainly happening out there, and the brands of cars that we'll be driving in 10 years' time, Tony, won't be those brands of cars that have been around for the last century. The Fords, the General Motors, the Mercedes-Benz, the Audis, some of those car manufacturers are under real threat from some of these technology companies.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it's interesting to see the convergence of technology around cars, because comparing it with a mobile phone on wheels is not very far from reality when you consider there's navigation and all these electronic things in there, and the idea of the battery and the whole thing. It's not a silly idea at all, is it?
No, it's not. And I've heard that term used before. And even when Tesla came out with their over-the-air updates, just the same as a mobile phone might have a new version of its operating system. Traditional car manufacturers wanted you to go back in to the workshop and have things like updates done by service personnel. Authorised service personnel must be the only ones who can do that. And Tesla blew that away with their over-the-air updates. So all those little things are starting to sneak in, where you're basically getting, as I said, a smartphone on wheels.
Yeah. And you're having this the Tech Talk on Binjang 91.5 with Matthew Dickerson. Stick around next week for our 2 sessions on next Tuesday. And in the meantime, it's back to all the great music and information on Binjang.
Right, I'll see you next week, Tony.
See you next week, Matthew.